your long-term interest to do so. So in these areas, America is clearly shooting itself in the foot.
A critic might say of what you're saying that, well, let's compare the United States with China. In the case of China, for example, its generosity, it's toward ASEAN during the financial crisis, where it kept the yuan fixed, was supported by its domestic concerns, namely the continued need for the economic machine to work, to employ more and more people, and so on. On the other hand, the United States, which is showing less generosity, even a meanness in its international affairs, one could argue that the leaders are responding to domestic interest groups that are, in essence, being disenfranchised as the rest of the world is marching toward modernity. Not so much disenfranchised, but are suffering the economic consequences. How do we reconcile these two pictures? I mean, because obviously the leadership in China and the leadership in America have different set of problems, but the solution lies in somehow figuring how to deal with that.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on a very important point here, you know. I mean, one reason why the rest of the world was happy to see the Western powers remain as custodians of the international order, custodians of the major international organizations, because the West had the strongest and most self-confident populations in the whole world. And, you know, the reason why the United States could, for example, argue forcefully, and Europe could argue forcefully for trade liberalization, was because they believe that as a result of trade liberalization, as a result of countries opening up their economies, America and Europe would naturally do well. So let's open up and compete. What's happened in the last 10 years, and this is a major shift in world history, by the way, the populations in Europe and the populations in America, certainly if you listen to Lou Dobbs on CNN, are beginning to fear that if you push for trade liberalization, no longer Europe is going to win, no longer America is going to win, it may be the Chinese and the Indians and so on and so forth. And that's a real danger for the world, because if suddenly the custodians of the international trade order begin to lose faith that they can win in this game, then they begin to retreat. And the danger is that these international trade institutions and processes could be endangered. And this is really the fundamental reason why the Doha round is being threatened. And here, this is why you need a much more sophisticated intelligentsia in America to actually explain to the American population that this is what free market economics is all about. Indeed, it was a European economist, Joseph Schumpeter, who said, hey, if you want free market economics, you have to have creative destruction. So, for example, in the case of Singapore, we used to have a textile industry, but once China and India began to develop textile industry, we said, with our high wages, we cannot compete with China and India. So we moved out. So you have to keep on shifting and adjusting and move into the areas of economic competition that you can do well. And clearly, America and Europe can do very well. You still have the best educated populations, the largest capital resources, you have the best universities in the world. You have a tremendous competitive edge over the rest of the world. America and Europe can compete and can win. But none of the leaders in Europe or America have the courage to tell the populations, we can compete and win if we adjust our economies, if we give up policies that are self-destructive. And one of the most self-destructive policies that Europe has is common agricultural policy. You know, there's a statistic which shows that with all the monies that the Europeans spend to subsidize their cows, they can fly each cow around the world 5 times in business class and still pay for duty-free shopping. You know? So, I mean, that's an amazing gross abuse of funds on the part of the Europeans. And that same money basically could be used to create a much more stable world by exporting its prosperity to all its neighbors.
Kishore, on that note and of warning and actually of hope, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. I want to recommend your book to our audience. It will be good for them to read to see how we have to change if we elect a new president. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with history.